Hello, it's Cole here. Welcome to Brockham Choral Online. This is a strange setting for me because I'm pre-recording this. This is Monday afternoon as I'm starting this little introductory section, and at the time that I'm kind of putting this together, I'm still not entirely sure exactly the format of how this is all going to work. Typically, when someone like me runs a choir rehearsal, we respond to what we hear. We respond to the musical information that we get. So we give you a piece of sheet music, you sing it, and then Marion and I sing and play along, and we find a way to make it enjoyable, and we find a way to learn and develop something together. Now, in the current environment, that's more difficult on Zoom, but not impossible, because we have some other things that we can respond to. But on a fully pre-recorded thing, what do we coach? What is the important bit? What do we try to prioritize, and what do we think is going to be most helpful for you, the people that are watching this rehearsal? So this format's going to be a bit experimental initially, and we're really welcoming of your feedback. If you want to send any feedback, please contact Estelle or Ed, the usual email addresses. They'll feed that back to me, and we'll find ways to try and improve things in weeks ahead. This week, we've got a combination of different things. We're going to talk a little bit about translation and pronunciation, why they're important. We're going to introduce a little bit of solfege, which is kind of a musicianship technique that I've started to introduce with more of my choirs. And I'm also going to recommend a couple of little pieces of music that I think could be fun for you to listen to in the near future. This is something you can watch moderately independently of the stuff we've been rehearsing, but the pronunciation guides in particular will prove quite useful. Alongside this, I'm going to be, along the next few weeks, conducting interviews with up-and-coming professional musicians from in the UK and overseas. I'm hoping to bring in some really nice, exciting names that will give you a different insight into aspects of music making, and try to make this as valuable a process for all of us, not just reinforcing what we are doing in our Zoom rehearsals right now and hopefully in live rehearsals in the future, but to give you something different, something off the beaten track, something that you might not necessarily always think about when you come to St. John's on a Tuesday evening. So that's that basically. In order to kind of contextualize this, I've decided that we're going to start off today with a discussion on pronunciation and translation. And to help me with this, I brought a friend along. Well, so we've both sung the Brahms Requiem like countless times, and I think we both have a preference that we desperately want to sing it in German rather than in English.
Because the translation is just so bad, but it's the translation has become very... It's the translation. And you get problems when you stick to the translation.
Yeah, because of course
the creation is also not great.
No, about the whole the heavens are telling the wonders of his works displays the firmament. It's just what?
Yeah.
All sorts of different like structural things. This is Alicia. Alicia is my partner. She is also a classic student at the University College London, a singer, and has very firm opinions as to why translation and pronunciation are extremely important. Why is translation important?
Translation is important because if you don't have a knowledge of the text that the original text is written in, it gives you a way of understanding the meaning of what is being said or sung.
I imagine that for singing, you'll have different considerations, you'll have different kind of ways of translating depending on the context in which you happen to be sharing for an audience.
I mean, for translating poetry anyway, you always have that idea of either you're translating it word for word and getting across the exact meaning of what the original text says, or you're doing a much more literary translation, so you're trying to come across, get across the style, and with poetry in particular, metre, and any kind of literary effects that the original author has used, and trying to portray that in the language that it's being translated into. particularly when translating into music, you have to be very aware of in particular the meter, because if you don't translate into the set meter, it won't fit to the music correctly. And also word stresses, so the composer will have used particular word stresses by the placement of words at the beginning of the bar, for example. And you've got to be very aware as a translator of how those word stresses are going to come across with where you fit your particular words into the meter, because it can change the meaning of the text completely.
It seems like it's one of those really difficult kind of lines to tread as to how much do you respect the specific words as they are translated, and how much do you contextualize it as in kind of a literary perspective.
Absolutely, and there'll be certain meanings, certain cultural things that will be understood in the original, and by the original audience, that just don't translate into our culture anymore. And so that's something that's also got to be taken into account.
Do you feel that there's would you have typically a preference of singing something in the original language, so focusing on the kind of the pronunciation rules of that language, rather than kind of going for a translation, or do you feel that there's times where a translation is more appropriate?
I think it depends on your audience. I think both are important. It's nice for audiences sometimes to have things sung in the original language, in the translation, so they feel like they can get a different type of authentic experience, because the original audiences would have understood what was being said. So I think there's two different types of authenticity that can come from singing both in the original language and in translation.
As a singer, do you feel that you have a particular responsibility to ensure that an audience does understand what you're trying to put across, that they can get?
Yeah, absolutely. The drama and the meaning of what you're singing is one of the most important things, if not the most important thing, and it tells a lot of how you sing, what you sing, and just getting those words across and getting the meaning across is very, very important.
Thanks, past me and past Alicia, for the contributions there. So in order to kind of build upon this, I brought on some language coaches to help us with not only discussing the translations of some of the works that we're looking at, but pronunciations so that we can perform them more effectively. We're starting off with Aquiles Morales. Aquiles is a conductor based in Mexico, and he is working on all sorts of wonderful stuff right now. He's talking to us about Letras al pano fino, and also sharing a little bit of his experience from working in Mexico during the time of COVID. Aquiles, how are you?
I'm very good. So glad to be here.
Thank you. For the benefit of the singers in my choir, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself? Where in the world are you right now, and how are you making music?
Well, I'm in Puerto Vallarta. This is a part in Mexico, in the near the ocean. I have the beach just there. So I moved here because I don't have any rehearsals except for online rehearsals. So I'm working everything from here. My work is at Mexico City, but I am glad to be able to do it from the beach. So I'm having fun and having
some are lucky enough to be able to rehearse from the beach. At the time that we are recording this, it is nearly 10 p.m. in the UK, and it is a sunny afternoon in Mexico. And I am so jealous of Aquiles right now. I'm feeling real envy, but that is okay. We will make up for it. So Aquiles is going to go over both the pronunciation of al pano fino, and we'll also talk a little bit about the translation and the context of the text. So Aquiles, fire away.
Al paño fino en la tienda una mancha le cayó. Por menos precios se vende porque perdió su valor. In Spanish, you say each vowel with the sound, one sound, no diphthongs. So that's kind of the problem with English speakers. So everything is just like as it is. So in Spain, because this is a Spanish text, you say precio. In Mexico, yeah, like you wouldn't say that in Mexico, but that's the way it should sound.
Out of interest, how would you say it in Mexico?
Precio with S.
So it's a S that sounds rather than that sound.
Exactly.
I understand.
Yeah. Also, be careful with the N with the thing. Just
like a squiggle on top.
Yeah, that makes ñ, paño, like gnocchi.
Paño.
Yeah, it's like gnocchi. Ñ. Yeah, and then we don't do that difference between V and B. So all the words with V, it's just vende, valor. We don't say valor.
Valor.
Valor, like B.
Oh, okay.
And basically it's that. So the meaning, if you talk about it just literally, it's a piece of very fine tissue or cloth that it's at the store and it gets stained, so it loses its value because of that. And what I think it's talking about, it's a woman that loses her virginity, and with this macho thinking, they're saying that it lost its value, something like that.
It's not unusual for this kind of music, this kind of poetry, to have this extra meaning to it.
I think it has it. I don't think nobody cares about a piece of cloth. I don't know.
Exactly. Why is someone just writing about a piece of cloth? There's got to be something deeper in here.
I think so. Well, I'm working with an organization that I created called Poder Choral, poderchoral.com, where I have a lot of choirs, from children's choirs and adults and everything. We work now online, everything. Mexico is still in quarantine.
The last time I saw these guys was over 200 days ago. It was like maybe it was 2 weeks before the concerts that we were going to do together, our first concerts together. To anyone in the choir watching, do check out Poder Choral's virtual choir videos. Some of the stuff that they had been working on in lockdown is absolutely fantastic. Really, really intense and passionate music making. And Aquiles is doing Aquiles is doing an absolutely fantastic job doing that. So again, Aquiles, thank you so much for your time and for helping Brockham Choral tonight.
Oh, it's nothing. Thank you so much for having me here.
Next, we have Walter Mahabir, a Canadian conductor now living in Berlin. Walter's going to talk us through pronunciation for Fauré and Passereau. There are some, I'll say, minor inconsistencies in what he has done. Given benefit of the doubt in this one, but I will continue to do my research, and if he has been proven wrong, then naughty Walter, and we will find a way to suggest corrections of advice in the future. What's kind of your game console choice? Do you do much while you're in Berlin, or are you?
I mean, I have my original Super Nintendo with the 20-in-1 type of thing. So when I first moved here, I was playing Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past.
Yeah.
And I completed all of that. But now I'm actually just dedicated to reading Harry Potter in German. So I'm done reading all of the entire series in its entirety in German. It's going to be done in like 7 days.
I think the most amazing thing I've seen from you recently is you got on Facebook. You keep loading up your like Google Sheets or your Excel. Where you're like actually noting live stats on like how many words, how's your reading pace in German, and it's like the difference in like the beginning was like it took you like a day or a day and a half to read a page, and then now it's like just shot up. It must just be like assimilation into the language, right?
Yeah, no, it's so relieving to be able to read through 20 or more pages on a day instead of one page, a day. And yeah, that was really frustrating. But now it's cool because then now I can teach. Now I know how to tell people how to get up on a broom and learn how to fly in German. So if anybody needs that,
because of course those are skills you're definitely going to require in Germany right now. So
of course, yeah.
Well done. This is Wally, Full name Walter Mahabir. He is a Toronto native and a graduate of McGill's amazing choral conducting program. And he is now, in his own words, kicking it, making music in Berlin. So we're now moving into French territory. And we're looking at Il est bel et bon. Now, I think some of Brockham Choral have sung this before. If those that haven't, this is basically a scene of a French farmyard where the women, the wives, are standing about. They are feeding their animals. They are talking about how the man that they love, or the man that one of the wives loves, is sweet and beautiful. He doesn't hit me. He looks after me. And then in the scene in the background, we hear the chickens clucking and crying. So yeah, all wonderful scene of rustic rural French life. Again, different times I suppose for Pierre Passereau, but anyway, there we are. You want to rock and roll that then, Robbie?
Il est bel et bon comme mère mon mari. For those who speak French, just pay attention when you're singing. Oftentimes when you get to words that have an E at the end, usually you would be pronouncing that, whereas if you were speaking it, you wouldn't. Il est bel et bon comme mère mon mari.
So it's kind of like a voiced at the end of it then. So it's not just Comer mon mari, which is what it looks like there in the text by itself. But if you have the score, you see Comer mon mari. So you have a little bit of a lift on there. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And it's never stressed. It's not
Yeah.
Comer mon mari. Comer mon mari. Il est trois de femmes, toutes d'un pays. Femme. Ce n'est pas femme. That's just a common trap that people get into. Il est trois de femmes, toutes d'un pays. Ils ont l'une à l'autre avait bon mari. Ils ne me courroucent, ne me battent aussi. The double S for courrouce is more of an S and not a Z. So it's not courrouce. Il ne me courrouce, ne me battent aussi. Il fait le ménage, il donne nos poulailles, et je prends mes plaisirs. Comer, c'est pour rire, quand les poulailles crient. And the cri there, as well, the ENT, the NT is negated completely, so it's cri. Petite coquette, cocodai. Your best chicken impression. Qu'est-ce que c'est?
Easy peasy, all perfectly fine. And then we move from this wonderful depiction of French rural life to a separate love story with the Gabriel Fauré Madrigal. This is basically a duet of folk who are young men and young women who are basically flirting with each other for most of the way through, and they feel that the other person is not going to give them that affection, and so they are mournful about it and trying to just come together in one wonderful embrace, but also kind of seemingly kind of grasping for compliments as well. I don't know if you felt the same way when you were looking at this text, Wally, but it definitely felt like, yeah, it seems quite attention seeking to me. But
yeah. Especially when you're singing it as well. If you have that image in your head, it's definitely going to sound different than if you have no idea.
Indeed.
Yeah.
So yeah, with you.
Okay. Il nous mène qui, sans merci, vous raillez de notre souci. I'm not sure. Remind me, Cole, if notre souci is if there's an apostrophe in the text. If there is an apostrophe, then the E is negated. Right?
I believe it's notre, as in like it was actually all one word. But I don't have the score to hand right now, so I can't verify that. I'm going to make a note to future Cole, who's editing this. Go and tell them now what it actually says. This is also your chance, future call, to correct anything you've heard earlier.
Future me speaking here. I've had a chance to listen to this and some other pronunciations of the Madrigal, and I am unconvinced as to what is the right course of action. So what I've decided to do is I'm going to splice in another spoken version of the Madrigal, and I would suggest you follow this instead, because this one seems just a little bit more convincing. Many apologies to Walter for wasting his time on this one, but it was important that we find something that works for all of us. So by all means, listen to Walter for the Passereau section you've listened to earlier, but for the Madrigal, you're going to hear just a sudden cut to what I expect you to be using as pronunciation here, and then it's going to cut back to the conversation with Walter as if the multiverses have suddenly worked together. So, fingers crossed.
Inhumaine qui, sans merci, vous raillez de notre souci. Aimez, aimez quand on vous aime. Ingrats, qui ne vous doutez pas des rêves éclos sur vos pas. Aimez, aimez quand on vous aime. Sachez, ô cruelle beauté, que les jours d'aimer sont comptés. Aimez, aimez quand on vous aime. Sachez, amoureux inconstant, que le bien d'aimer n'a qu'un temps. Aimez, aimez quand on vous aime. Un même destin nous poursuit, et notre folie est la même. C'est celle d'aimer qui nous fuit, c'est celle de fuir qui nous aime.
Thanks, Future Me. That was brilliant. I love the multiverse. We spent the next half hour or so talking about all sorts of things to do with choral conducting, some pronunciation rules for French, and kept flubbing up the madrigal. That said, Wally's a really interesting guy. His experience of how he used dance and he was growing up to influence how he became a choral conductor is really interesting. So I'm going to upload the interview onto the YouTube channel. Do check it out in the next couple of days. But that's going to come up as a separate video. Thanks again, Wally, for everything you were doing for our conversation. It was really nice to catch up with you. It was really good to make music with you again. One of the most useful tools I found when I've been trying to learn how to sight read and process music quickly is Solfege. And that comes from a whole system of music codified from Zoltan Kodály and John Kerwin. Back in the late 1800s, John Kerwin was a British music educator, basically promoting a new style of understanding how to read sheet music. If you look at octavos from this time, you'll see that not only did they have a guide of here's all the notes in the typical Western notation that we use, but there were also letters underneath all of the notes, which would refer to do, ti, la, sol, fa. He was also the person that came up with the different hand signs that we now associate with it. Moving on about 50 or 60 years, you have Kodály, who is a Hungarian ethnomusicologist, composer, and teacher, and he essentially defines this whole system of music education, which is embraced in Hungary and internationally, basically using folk song as the key building block of education. If you can understand folk song, if you can learn how to sing folk song and use the best possible materials for coaching at the earliest possible stage, then you are able to develop an innate sense of musicianship. Solfege is one element of that. The whole Kodály structure encompasses elements of understanding music theory, understanding structures, understanding rhythm and pulse, musical notation, etc. But the thing that I think is one of the most relevant things for singers initially is learning how to pitch and learning how to differentiate intervals. And that's where Kodály becomes particularly helpful. You have different styles of scale based on major and minor and so forth. And the basic signs for this in the major start with do. Do can be, of course, any note. There are different theories as to whether do is fixed. In certain European countries, do is always going to be fixed as middle C, and then the do above that would be high C. But in Britain, in Australia, and a number of other educational systems, do is movable, and so that's helpful in terms of thinking about the scale shape generally. So you start off with do, which is your fist basically around about your belly. That's the first note of the scale. Re, your hand is pointing up diagonally towards the ground. Mi, it is parallel to the ground, facing down. Fa, your it's almost like you're doing a negative thumbs down kind of thing. Your fingers are clawed in, but they don't need to be all the way in. So, your palm is facing you. La, it's almost like you're holding an apple in the air, this kind of thing. Ti, just pointing up. Do. Now, as you can see, what I've done in that whole process is build from do, from my belly, all the way up to the top of my head, do here. And the important bit about that is that visually, if you're instructing that to someone else, then not only does one get a sense of this is where you are in the scale, but a reminder that it's a low do, or high do, or higher do, or however you want to approach it from there. Typically, when you do this, you can repeat this pattern, so you could be on do, re, mi. It doesn't get too much higher than that, because most vocal lines that you sing in folk songs, that kind of thing, tend not to be more than maybe an octave and a half. You can then also take the same principle to the minor scale, and as we know from a basic understanding of harmony, and if you don't know that, stay tuned to another episode, you start off with la, and la, if you, this was your do, ti, la, la would be your starting note, la, ti, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la. You may have done a different version of this where you sharpen the seventh. There is more on that in due course. Now, as you can see, those are two basic ways of understanding the scale. There are other symbols that you can use when you sharpen or flatten notes, and there's different ways of understanding that, but that's not necessary for today. The basics are, if you can understand those interval shapes, and if you can understand that kind of phrasing, then it's easy to look at, say, a 3-note sequence, such as a mi, re, do, and if you can see that in a piece of music, you can go, okay, I know that whatever note I'm starting on, if it's mi, I'll just go re, do, or if it's a bigger leap, like a so, do, then it doesn't matter what your sol is, you know where do is in relation to that. So to sum up, the solfege is a system stylized by Kodai and Kerwin and others, really useful musical education, and can be used in specific contexts to help understand how to read and process melodic music. With enough practice of exercises, you can develop the skill set to apply that in all sorts of different musical contexts. It's time to put it into practice. When we start looking at solfege, we typically introduce just a simple interval to start off with. The use of sol, which is the 5th of the major scale, and mi, which is the 3rd of the major scale. So that would be sol, mi, sol, mi. And you can reinforce that by engaging the hand sign along with it. Sol, mi, sol, mi, sol, mi, sol, mi. Once you practice that a few times, you can consider changing where your sol is. So say, for example, this is your new sol. Sol, mi, sol, mi, sol, mi. You'll have heard that obviously my mi has shifted up because sol has shifted up. But the interval between sol and mi remains exactly the same. The proportions remain the same. You can then take it from the other way around if you wanted to make it a bit more complex. So say we're going to change it not on sol, but on mi. So say this is your mi. Mi, sol, mi, sol, mi, sol, mi, sol. Experiment with that. There's very numerous keyboard apps available, or you can bring out your own keyboard itself, and then just press a note, make that your sol or your mi, and practice something in relation to it. Sol, mi, or pick another note. sol, mi, sol, mi. Or the reverse. Mi, sol, mi, sol, mi. The more you practice that first interval, the more you'll be settled for everything else that follows. Next, you want to try adding in one more interval, and we'll add in this instance the La. So sol, let's get that right. Sol, la, mi. Practice. Sol, la, mi. Again. Sol, la, mi. Again. Sol, la, mi. Then you can practice different component parts of that. Now that we have 3 notes, you can combine the difference between sol, la, which is just one tone difference, sol, mi, or la, mi, mi, la, sol, mi, sol, la, sol, mi. Patterns like that. And again, it doesn't matter what your sol starting note is. Let's go back here. Just so long as you remember the intervals. Sol, la, mi, sol, la, mi. If you want to reinforce this, just practice different notes. Imagine them as your sol, your la, and mi. And then we start singing it like that. Your distance between sol and la is 1 tone. Your distance between sol and mi is a descending minor third. We'll come to the real terms of intervals in due course. And the interval between our la and our mi is a perfect fourth. Now, those intervals will help us in so much work that we're doing in the future. So say if you're a bass and you just want to make sure you go do, sorry, do, so, do. You could also imagine that interval as la, mi, la, mi. The space is exactly the same, but we just happen to phrase it in different notes. Now, as we have these intervals and as we have this structure, it helps inform us as we come to other bits of sight reading. Let's do one more component exercise. So now we've had an opportunity to do one step, and we've had an opportunity to do a big gap between sol and mi and la and mi. Let's now take something which can be quite sequential. Mi, re, do, hot cross buns, etc. 3 blind mice, whatever you happen to choose for that one. The idea of this one compared to the others is that while the other ones tend to have a larger leap, this one is fully sequential. It's just 3, 2, 1 all together in one little phrase. And again, that's one of those things that if you know what that looks like, you know what that sounds like, that you can take that pattern and apply it into any particular piece of music that happens to say 3, 2, 1. So let's have, let's just say that's your mi, and we'll go mi, re, do. Mi, re, do. Again. Mi, re, do. Let's go higher this time. Mi, re, do. Again. Mi, re, do. Now, obviously, you'll have heard that, okay, just because that sounds like you'd start to go in the same pattern as the first one, it has a different ending note. The different ending note is still the same pattern that we've had previously. The leaps are still the same. We're not trying to remember exact notes, we're trying to remember the distances between those notes. That's why we have the structure of a scale, because a scale at the end of the day is a repeated series of notes. It's a series of different intervals of half steps and whole steps, and it's that combination that produces the harmony that we understand today. Pick one more. Let's go for this one. Mi, re, do. Again. Mi, re, if instead of this being mi, it was do. Let's see if we can go up. Do, re, mi. Again. Do, re, mi. This seems overwhelming initially. Please don't be alarmed by it. This is all sequential steps that you would typically spend weeks and weeks just practicing in little classes over and over again. When Hungarian children are studying these patterns and using them, then they learn them in the context of other songs. They learn them in the context of other folk music. So one of the things that we could maybe turn to in the future, now that we know do, re, mi, sol, la, we now know something called the pentatonic scale, which is the scale over which most folk song is based. So we can now, in a future week, take a piece of folk song, take the do, re, mi, sol, la pattern, and apply it into that. In the meantime, if you can think of any pentatonic folk song, and you want to experiment with singing it to do, re, mi, sol, and la, then give it a shot. See what you can work out. Remember, do is the bottom, re is the second, mi is the third, sol's the fifth, la's the sixth. You can, of course, include the next octave. Do, re, mi, sol, la, do, re, mi. I should use auto-tune a bit more to get that pitch higher. Let's turn to something different to finish up. Let's introduce a brand new piece of music that you can have a listen to over the course of the week ahead. Completely different piece of music to finish up on for today. Many of you will have remembered from sessions way back 1,000 years ago in April and May, when I was introducing some contemporary music. And one composer that has struck me as extremely interesting is Sir James MacMillan, the Scottish composer from the west coast of Scotland, Ayrshire. He recently celebrated his 61st birthday and is a composer of some strong repute for working with choirs. His choral symphony, Symphony No. 5, Le Grand Nocturne, I think was what it was pronounced, was performed in the Edinburgh International Festival 2 years ago. And an absolutely stunning writer for choirs, but also writes really accessible music, and music that is based on these kind of Scottish traditions. And maybe it's because I feel a little bit homely right now, or maybe it's because it's just feeling in the mood for it, but he's a composer that writes in this really powerful style. There are moments of fairly simple folk-like ornamentation in his music, so when he lands on a note there's a little bit of inflection around it that kind of sounds like Gaelic psalmody, but there's also this element of just folk and religious practice to it, which forms a lot of his music. MacMillan would very basically be described as a quite radical Catholic socialist, or certainly was at the outset of his career, and that's definitely informed a lot of his orchestral music. It's informed a lot of his professional practice. So The Gallant Weaver, which is a piece written for, I believe it's a 6-part choir, and there's this fantastic recording by the 16 that we'll finish up on today. There's a score that's attached to it if you want to sing along to it. The whole structure of it takes this lyrical lilting line, a setting of Robert Burns, and then set that above this sonorous drone effect that comes from lower voices. It's antiphonal in ways. By antiphonal I mean there's kind of sound against sound. The choirs almost respond to one another, and so you feel enveloped in this really warm and rich sound, and it's really satisfying to have a little sing through and really satisfying to take a look at. The recording that's attached to this is one from Harry Christopher's in the 16, so you've got a pretty good choir to sing along to for this one. So this is James MacMillan's The Gallant Weaver as a piece to finish up on for today. Thank you for your attention. Again, if you have any feedback to send along, then please do send along to Estelle and Ed, and look forward to seeing you live next week. Ta-ta for now.